Intercepted transmission, Galactic Trade Corridor 9 Fall, Node 77R. Origin, DREVANI Merchant Vessel Sullen Tide, REG, TG 4419. Destination, Trade Guild WOSTATION ORRETHKL, DREVANI Commerce Authority. Timestamp 1402-11 Galactic Standard. Classification, Emergency Priority Unknown Auto-Forwarded, Routing Anomaly Detected. This is Captain Tavril Ascari of the Trade Hauler Sullen Tide, Commerce Authority Registration TG 4419, declaring a Class 2 emergency on Corridor 9 Fall at Junction Marker 77. Reactor coolant breach in the port nacelle. Hull integrity declining. I am carrying 412 civilian passengers contracted for resettlement transit to Orth Colony. Repeat 412 passengers, including 91 children under age of legal transport. Requesting immediate tug assist from any Commerce Authority vessel within relay range. Estimated time to critical hull failure, 9 hours, 40 minutes. Sullen Tide out. ROUTING note. Signal received at Junction Relay 77R auto-forwarded per Standard Commerce Authority Emergency Protocol to Way Station Orithcal Primary, Drevani Sector Command Secondary. Additional forward detected. Signal also routed via Junction 77R Node C to Terran Commercial Mutual ID Network Treaty of Shared Lanes, Article 119, Subclause 4. Node C handshake confirmed. Terran Network Acknowledgement received at 14:02, 14 GST. Tavril Ascari read the routing confirmation twice, then a third time. He stood at the communications alcove of the Sullen Tides bridge, his copper-scaled hand flat against the display panel, and felt the ship shudder beneath him, a deep, irregular tremor that ran through the deck plates and up through his boots and into the bones of his shins. The coolant breach was real. The timeline was real. 9 hours and 37 minutes now, according to the engineering readout blinking amber on the main display. He had sent the distress call to the Commerce Authority, as procedure required. He had flagged Sector Command as a secondary recipient, as procedure required. What he had not done, what he would never have done, was flag the Terran network. Gellin, he said. His communications officer, a young Drevani female with pale silver scales and eyes too wide for the situation, looked up from her console. Captain. Explain this routing note. She leaned forward and read it. He watched her mouth move. He watched her pupils contract, the involuntary Drevani tell for alarm, for the sudden understanding that a thing has happened which cannot be taken back. Junction 77R has a C-node, she said. Her voice was careful. It was installed under the Treaty of Shared Lanes, Article 119. I am aware of Article 119. I helped draft the Commerce Authority's objection to it. The C-node auto-forwards any emergency signal that passes through 77R to the Terran Commercial Mutual Aid Network. It's automatic, Captain. There is no opt-out. The ship shuddered again. Somewhere below, in the passenger holds, 412 Drevani civilians were sitting in rows of fold-down seats, clutching their transit vouchers, wondering why the lights had flickered. 91 of them were children. Tavril had counted them personally during boarding, as he always did, because a captain who did not count his passengers was not a captain. Recall the signal, he said. I can't recall it, sir. The C-node handshake already confirmed. The Terran network received it 3 seconds after we transmitted. Then send a follow-up. Inform the Terran network that the distress call was intended for Commerce Authority vessels only. No Terran assistance is requested or required. Gellin's hands moved over the console. She typed the message. She sent it. The confirmation came back in 11 seconds, far too fast for a reply from any Drevani authority, which told Tavril everything he needed to know about who was actually listening on the other end of that junction node. The reply was 2 words: acknowledged monitoring. Not acknowledged standing down. Not acknowledged disregarding, just monitoring. The Terrans were watching his distress call, and they had not promised to stop watching it. Tavril turned back to the main display. The schematic of the sullen tide filled the screen, a broad, flat-bellied cargo hauler, 240 meters from stem to drive plate, built for bulk transit and not for emergencies. The port nacelle was highlighted in red. The coolant breach was spreading. His chief engineer, Merritt, had sealed 3 of the 4 secondary lines, but the primary line was cracked along a weld joint that had been inspected and certified 6 months ago by a Commerce Authority dock inspector, whose name Tavril now wished he had memorized for the purpose of filing a formal complaint, if he lived long enough to file it. "Merritt," he said into the intercom, "status. Primary coolant line is cracked along a 40-centimeter seam." Merritt's voice came back, thick with the grit of someone working in a hot compartment. "I can't weld it while the system is pressurized, and I can't depressurize it without shutting down the port reactor entirely." "What happens if you shut down the port reactor?" "We lose 40% of our power generation. Life support holds on the starboard reactor alone, but we lose main thrust, we lose the aft shield projector, and we lose the cargo bay heating system." "The passengers are in the cargo bay?" "Yes, Captain. The cargo bay will drop to -60 within 4 hours without heating. The children will be hypothermic in 2. Tavril closed his eyes. He opened them. The display had not changed. The timeline had not changed. 9 hours and 29 minutes to critical hull failure if the breach continued to spread. 2 hours to hypothermia in the cargo bay if he shut down the port reactor. And the Commerce Authority's nearest vessel was, he checked the relay board, 7 hours out. Sector Command's nearest asset was 9 hours, both beyond the window that mattered. "Gellin, what is the closest vessel of any registration within 4 hours of our position?" She already knew. He could see it in the way her hands hesitated over the keys, in the way her silver scales had gone flat against her jaw. "There is one vessel within 3 hours, Captain. It is broadcasting a Terran transponder, Corvette class. Identification reads as the TCV Brannigan, Terran Commercial Patrol." "Commercial Patrol?" "Yes, sir. It appears to be conducting a standard trade lane inspection on Corridor 9 Fall. It altered course 11 minutes ago." Tavril felt the word settle. Altered course. 11 minutes ago. The Terrans had received his distress call 14 minutes ago. 3 minutes to read it, assess it, and order a warship, because a Terran Corvette was a warship no matter what they stamped on the registry, to change heading. "Did we request their assistance?" "No, Captain." "Did anyone request their assistance?" "No, Captain. The C-node forwarded automatically. The Terran network is monitoring. The Brannigan altered course on its own authority." He let that sit. A Terran warship had heard a Drevani merchant's distress call, a call explicitly not addressed to them, a call followed by a correction explicitly telling them to stand down, and had altered course anyway. Not because anyone asked, because it was monitoring. "What is the Brannigan's estimated arrival time?" 2 hours, 51 minutes at current heading and speed." Inside the window. Comfortably inside the window. The Terrans would arrive before the cargo bay froze, before the hull breach went critical, before the Commerce Authority's nearest vessel was even halfway here. Tavril straightened his uniform jacket, a reflex, the by-the-book captain's reflex, the same way he counted passengers and filed reports, and objected to treaty subclauses he considered jurisdictionally overreaching. He was a merchant captain. He hauled cargo and passengers along approved corridors under Commerce Authority oversight. He did not deal with Terrans. He had never dealt with Terrans. He had built a 30-year career on the principle that a well-maintained ship, proper routing, and adherence to published protocols would prevent exactly this kind of situation. The ship lurched. A deep groan of stressed metal rolled through the hull, and the lights on the bridge dimmed for a full 2 seconds before the backup power bus caught them. Captain Merritt's voice came through the intercom, and this time it was clipped, urgent. The primary coolant line just extended the crack by another 12 centimeters. I'm revising the timeline. We don't have 9 hours. We have 6, maybe 5. 5 hours. The Commerce Authority was 7 hours out. Gellin. Captain. Open a channel to the Terran vessel Brannigan. He watched her hands move. He watched the connection establish a clean, quick handshake, the kind of connection speed that spoke of communications technology designed for exactly this kind of moment. The Terran answered on the second ping. Brannigan Actual, this is Commander Wen. We've been monitoring your situation, sullen tide. What do you need? The voice was female. Calm. Not calm in the way of someone who did not understand the severity, calm in the way of someone who had already assessed the severity, already made her decisions, and was now simply waiting for the other party to arrive at the same conclusion she had reached 11 minutes ago when she changed course. Tavril had rehearsed nothing. He was a by-the-book captain, and there was no book for this no Commerce Authority protocol for requesting assistance from a Terran military vessel that was already en route to help you before you asked. Commander Wen, this is Captain Tavril Oscari of the Sullen Tide. I have a coolant breach in my port nacelle, a cracked primary line I cannot repair while pressurized, and 412 passengers including 91 children in a cargo bay that will freeze if I shut down the reactor to make repairs. My timeline to critical failure has just been revised downward to 5 hours. The Commerce Authority's nearest vessel is 7 hours out. A pause, not a long one. Copy that, Sullen Tide. We are 2 hours 47 minutes from your position at current speed. I can push that to 2 hours 19 if I authorize emergency acceleration. I'm authorizing it now. We also have a supply tender, the TCV Marsh Hen, running parallel on the same corridor. She's 4 hours out but carries portable heating units and emergency life support pods. I'm redirecting her to you as well. A supply tender, portable heating units, emergency life support pods. Tavril had asked for nothing. He had told the Terrans to stand down. They were sending 2 ships. Commander, I should note that our original distress call was intended for Commerce Authority vessels. The routing to your network was automatic, through a junction node I was not aware was active. Understood, Captain. Article 119, Subclause 4. It's a standard mutual aid forward. We don't require an invitation. The treaty authorizes us to render assistance to any vessel in distress on a shared corridor. But I appreciate the clarification. We'll coordinate with your Commerce Authority when they arrive. In the meantime, can you give me your passenger manifest and your engineering schematics? My damage control team will want to review them en route. She was already planning the repair. She was asking for his schematics so that her people could study the problem while they were still 2 hours away, so that when they arrived they would not need to spend time understanding a Drevani reactor system they had likely never seen before. They would walk onto his ship already knowing where the crack was and how to fix it. Tavril looked at Gellin. She was already transmitting the manifest and the schematics. Data sent, Commander. Received, Brannigan out. We'll check in every 30 minutes. If your situation changes, hail us immediately. The channel closed. The bridge was quiet except for the low hum of the starboard reactor, the only reactor still running, and the intermittent shudder of the cracking port nacelle. Captain Gellin said, "What?" There's a second routing anomaly in the original transmission log. Show me. She put it on the main display. The routing tree for his distress call, the original signal, sent to the Commerce Authority way station at Orith Cal. The primary route, clean, confirmed. The secondary route to Sector Command, clean, confirmed. The tertiary route through the C-node to the Terran network, automatic, confirmed. And beneath that, a fourth line he had not seen before. Additional forward. Terran Commercial Mutual Aid Network rerouted signal to Terran Naval Sector Coordination, Western Reach. Reason: passenger count exceeds emergency assist threshold, 400 plus. Naval Coordination notified. Naval Coordination, Tavril said. Yes, Captain. It appears the Terran Commercial Network has its own internal forwarding protocols. When a distress call involves more than 400 passengers, it automatically escalates to their Naval Sector Coordination Office. So the Terrans received our distress call that we did not send to them, forwarded it within their own network to a higher authority that we definitely did not send it to, and are now treating a Drevani merchant hauler's coolant breach as a naval matter. It appears so, Captain. Tavril sat down in his command chair. He did not slam himself into it. He was not a man who slammed, but he sat with more force than he intended, and the chair's worn cushion compressed audibly beneath him. He had been a merchant captain for 30 years. He had transited Corridor 9 Fall more than 200 times. He knew every junction node, every relay marker, every Commerce Authority regulation pertaining to emergency procedures on shared trade corridors. He had never once required assistance. He had never once deviated from published protocol. He had filed his maintenance reports on time, inspected his own ship quarterly, and treated every regulation not as an inconvenience but as a covenant between a captain and the lanes he traveled. And now a 40-centimeter crack in a weld joint was going to teach him something that 30 years of perfect adherence to protocol could not. That the lanes did not belong only to the Commerce Authority, that the junction nodes carried obligations he had not consented to, and that the Terrans, of all species, had built a network so thoroughly integrated into the shared corridor infrastructure that his own distress call could reach their naval command before it reached his own government's nearest ship. Merritt, he said into the intercom. Captain, what is the cargo bay temperature? 12 degrees and falling. I've sealed all non-essential compartments to conserve heat. The passengers have been given thermal blankets from the emergency stores. How many thermal blankets do we carry? 300. We have 412 passengers. Yes, Captain. I've distributed them to the children and the elderly first. The remaining adults are doubling up. 112 adults with no thermal blankets in a cargo bay that would reach -60 in 4 hours. Tavril did the arithmetic. 2 hours and 19 minutes until the Terran Corvette arrived. The bay would be at approximately -15 by then. Survivable, but not comfortably. The children would be shivering. The elderly would be in distress. Gellin, hail the Brannigan. Channel open, Captain. Commander Wen, this is sullen tide. Our cargo bay temperature is 12 degrees and dropping. We carry 300 thermal blankets for 412 passengers. I am projecting bay temperature at approximately -15 upon your arrival. The response came in 4 seconds. Copy, sullen tide. We're loading our portable heating units now. We carry 6, rated for compartments up to 800 cubic meters each. What are the dimensions of your cargo bay? 4,200 cubic meters. We'll deploy all 6 in a cluster configuration. We also carry 80 emergency thermal wraps in our medical stores. They'll be ready to distribute on arrival. What is the medical status of your passengers? No injuries, no medical emergencies at this time. Several elderly passengers with chronic conditions that may be aggravated by cold. Understood, our medic will prioritize them. Brannigan out. 80 thermal wraps, 6 portable heating units, a medic who would prioritize the elderly. The Terrans were not simply coming to tow his ship, they were preparing to service his passengers as though they were their own. The next hour passed in the particular kind of silence that exists on a dying ship, not true silence, because the hull groaned and the reactor hummed and the environmental system wheezed, but the silence of people waiting for a thing they cannot control. Tavril spent it on the bridge, monitoring the coolant breach, tracking the Brannigan's approach on the navigation display, and receiving status reports from Merritt every 15 minutes. The crack was growing, slowly but growing. The engineering readout showed it at 58 centimeters now, nearly half again its original length. Merritt had rigged a temporary bypass on one of the secondary coolant lines to slow the thermal cascade, but it was a stopgap, the engineering equivalent of pressing a cloth against a wound that needed surgery. 40 minutes into the wait, Tavril left the bridge. He told Gellin he was inspecting the passenger compartment. What he was doing was counting heads, because a captain who sat on his bridge while his passengers froze was not the kind of captain he had spent 30 years becoming. The corridor to the cargo bay was colder than the bridge. The deck plates radiated chill through his boots, and the overhead conduits were rimed with a thin crust of frost. When he opened the cargo bay hatch, the cold hit him like a wall, the deep, bone-reaching cold of a compartment that was losing its war with the vacuum outside. 412 people looked up at him, some of them. The rest were huddled under thermal blankets in clusters of 4 and 5, sharing body heat the way Giovanni had shared it for 1,000 generations before anyone had invented environmental systems. The children were in the center. As Merritt had said, 91 small bodies under a communal mound of Commerce Authority green blankets, their scales dimmed to the pale bronze that Giovanni children turn when they are cold. Some of them were sleeping. Others were watching him with the wide, unblinking eyes of young things who understood that something was wrong, but trusted the adults around them to fix it. A Giovanni woman near the front row stood when she saw him. She was middle-aged, broad-shouldered, wearing a transit passenger's standard coverall with a resettlement contract number printed on the breast. She had given her thermal blanket to 2 children beside her. "Captain, how long?" "A vessel is en route, approximately 2 hours. "Commerce Authority." He hesitated, 1 beat. She saw it. "Not Commerce Authority," she said. "A Terran patrol vessel. They are the closest asset." The woman looked at him steadily. She did not ask why the Commerce Authority was not closer. She did not ask why a Terran vessel was coming to a Giovanni merchant hauler. She asked the only question that mattered in a cargo bay at 8 degrees and falling. "Will they have heat?" "Yes, portable heating units and thermal wraps. Their medic will attend to the elderly." The woman nodded once. She sat back down. She pulled one of the children, a small boy with scales so pale they were nearly white, onto her lap and wrapped her arms around him. Tavril turned and walked back to the corridor. He sealed the hatch behind him and stood in the cold hallway for a moment, one hand flat against the metal, feeling the tremor of the hull through his palm. Then he walked back to the bridge. The Brannigan's 30-minute check-in came right on schedule. Commander Wen's voice was unchanged, the same measured calm, the same precise phrasing. She reported that her damage control team had reviewed the sullen tide schematics in detail and had identified 2 repair approaches, one faster and one more conservative. She asked which Tavril preferred. He told her he would defer to her chief's judgment on arrival. She said her chief would likely recommend the faster one. He said he expected she would. At 1 hour and 40 minutes, Merritt reported a secondary complication. The temporary bypass he had rigged on the secondary coolant line was developing a pressure imbalance. It was not dangerous, not yet, but it meant the stopgap was degrading. The port nacelle was generating heat it could no longer shed, and the thermal load was beginning to radiate into the adjacent hull sections. "What does that mean for the timeline?" Tavril asked. "The crack isn't growing faster," Merritt said, "but the hull around the nacelle is heating from the inside. If the bypass fails entirely, we'll get a thermal runaway in the nacelle housing." That doesn't affect the passengers directly. The cargo bay is on the opposite side of the ship. But it means the crack will propagate much faster once the metal around it reaches stress temperature. What is your revised estimate? If the bypass holds, we have the same 5 hours. If it fails, we have 3, maybe less. 3 hours. The Brannigan was 1 hour and 9 minutes away, still inside the window, but the margin had narrowed from comfortable to tight. Understood. Continue monitoring. Tavril relayed the update to Commander Wen. Her response was immediate and without inflection. Copy that, sullen tide. We're shaving time where we can. Revised ETA 1 hour 4 minutes. She had found 5 minutes somewhere. He did not ask how. The cargo bay temperature was at 4 degrees when Gellin spoke. Captain, the Brannigan is hailing. Put her through. Sullen tide, this is Brannigan. We are 41 minutes from your position. I want to brief you on our approach and docking plan. Go ahead, Commander. We're going to come alongside your port nacelle and dock at your forward airlock. My damage control team, 6 personnel, led by Chief Warrant Officer Dax Perrin, will board first with the heating units and thermal wraps. They'll proceed directly to your cargo bay. Once your passengers are stabilized, Chief Perrin and 3 of his team will move to your engineering section to assess the coolant breach. My ship will maintain station alongside in case we need to evacuate your passengers to the Brannigan. How many passengers can the Brannigan accommodate? Normally, 30. I've ordered non-essential compartments cleared and converted to emergency berthing. We can take 160 in a squeeze. It won't be comfortable, but it'll be warm. 160 out of 412, less than half. If it came to evacuation, they would need multiple trips, and each trip would mean uncoupling, maneuvering, redocking time they might not have. Understood, Commander. We will prepare the forward airlock for your arrival. One more thing, Captain. The Marsh Hen, our supply tender, has increased speed. She's now 3 hours out instead of 4. She carries emergency life support pods rated for 50 occupants each. She has 8 of them. 8 pods, 50 each, 400, nearly his entire passenger count. Commander Wen, the Marsh Hen was 4 hours out when you mentioned her 90 minutes ago. You said she was running parallel on the corridor. That's correct. She has increased speed by 25% to close the gap. She has. On whose authority? Her captain's. Captain Vasquez read the passenger manifest I forwarded and made his own call. He has children, Captain Ascari, 2 of them. Tavril said nothing for a moment. A Terran supply tender captain, reading a Drevani passenger manifest that listed 91 children, had pushed his ship to emergency speed without being ordered to do so. Because he had children. Thank you, Commander, sullen tied out. He sat in the command chair and watched the navigation display. The Brannigan's icon was a small blue triangle, closing steadily. Behind it, further along the corridor, a second blue triangle, the Marsh Hen, was moving faster than it should have been. The bridge was cold now. Not dangerously so, but cold enough that Tavril could see the faintest trace of mist when he exhaled. He had ordered the bridge environmental system reduced to minimum to conserve power for the cargo bay. His bridge crew Gellin, the navigator Powell, the system's officer Dren sat at their stations in their uniform jackets with the collars turned up. Captain, Dren said, I'm reading a power fluctuation in the starboard reactor. Tavril stood, specify. Output oscillation, 3%. It's within tolerance, but the trend is downward. A 3% oscillation in the only reactor keeping 412 people alive. Within tolerance today. Outside tolerance in an hour, perhaps. Or perhaps not. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was the ship telling him that the port nacelle's death was beginning to drag the starboard systems down with it through sympathetic stress, the shared power bus, the shared coolant headers, the thousand small connections between two halves of a ship that was designed to operate as a whole. Monitor it, report any change. Yes, Captain. 27 minutes to the Brannigan's arrival. The cargo bay was at -2 degrees. Merritt reported that the children had been moved to the center of the bay, surrounded by adults, the thermal blankets layered over them in a communal cocoon. The elderly were seated along the interior bulkhead, which retained some residual heat from the adjacent corridor. Two of the elderly passengers, a bonded pair in their 9th decade, had begun showing signs of hypothermic stress. Merritt had given them his own jacket and the jacket of his engineering assistant. Captain, Gellin said, additional transmission incoming from the Terran Naval Sector Coordination Office. Tavril looked at her. Read it. She read it aloud, her voice neutral, her silver scales flat. From Terran Naval Sector Coordination, Western Reach. To TCV Brannigan, TCV Marsh Hen, all Terran assets Corridor 9 Fall. Ray, Drevani Merchant Vessel Sullen Tide, 412 passengers. Message, hospital ship THS Quiet Water has been notified and is available for diversion from patrol station if medical evacuation is required. Current distance, 11 hours. Diversion authorized upon request from Brannigan Actual. Additionally, Terran Commercial Attach Office has notified Drevani Commerce Authority Way Station Orithcal of situation status. Commerce Authority Vessel ETA has been communicated to Brannigan. Coordinate as required. End message. A hospital ship, 11 hours out but available. The Terrans had a hospital ship within diversion range of his position, and they had pre-authorized its deployment based on his passenger count. They had also, and this detail lodged in Tavril's mind like a splinter, contacted his own commerce authority on his behalf to inform them of the situation status. The Terrans were coordinating with his government for him, because his government's nearest ship was still 5.5 hours away, and the Terrans were 23 minutes away. Captain, Powell said from the navigation console, the Brannigan is decelerating, docking approach. Tavril stood and straightened his jacket again. He was a by-the-book captain. When a ship docked with his vessel, he met the boarding party at the airlock. It was protocol. It was courtesy. It was what a captain did. Gellin, you have the bridge. Dren, continue monitoring the starboard reactor. Powell, maintain position tracking on the Marsh Hen. I will be at the forward airlock. He walked through the corridor toward the forward airlock. The corridor was cold, his breath was fully visible now, and the overhead lights had dimmed to 70% as the power management system continued its automated conservation. He passed the sealed hatch to the cargo bay and heard, faintly through the metal, the sound of voices. Not panicked voices. Drevani voices speaking in the low, steady register that his people used when they were frightened, but holding themselves together out of respect for the children among them. He reached the forward airlock. Through the small viewport in the outer door, he could see the Brannigan close now, absurdly close. A compact Terran Corvette with a hull that looked like it had been dragged through an asteroid field, and then repainted by someone who did not believe in matching colors. There were scorch marks along the forward quarter that had been painted over but not sanded, and a section of hull plating near the dorsal antenna array that was clearly a different alloy than the rest, a replacement panel, grafted on with the utilitarian indifference of a ship that prioritized function over appearance in every decision. Terran naval vessels were, in his experience, aesthetically displeasing. They were also, in his experience, exactly where you did not expect them to be, doing exactly what you had not asked them to do. The docking clamps engaged with a solid, precise thunk that resonated through the sullen tide's frame. The airlock pressurized. The equalization took 9 seconds fast, because the Brannigan ran its airlocks at a slightly higher pressure than Drevani standard, and the differential pushed the seal tight. The inner door opened, and Tavril found himself facing a Terran in a gray jumpsuit with tool harnesses over both shoulders, a welding rig strapped to her back, and a face that suggested she had not slept recently and did not consider this relevant. Chief Warrant Officer Dax Perrin, Brannigan Damage Control. You're Captain Ascari. I am. Good to meet you, sir. Where are your passengers? Cargo bay, one deck below, aft corridor. Temperature is approximately -4. Perrin did not pause. She did not ask for a tour or a briefing or a layout schematic. She turned to the 5 Terrans behind her, each of them carrying equipment that had clearly been pre-staged and pre-assigned, and gave orders that sounded rehearsed because they had been rehearsed somewhere during the last hour of approach. This team had practiced what they would do when they came aboard, and now they were executing. Kowalski, Reeves heating units to the cargo bay, double time, set up cluster configuration center mass. Vasquez, Chen thermal wraps distribute to anyone without a blanket, children and elderly first, work your way outward. Akafor, you're on medical, find the worst cases, triage, report back to me within 15 minutes. She turned back to Tavril. Captain, with your permission, I'd like to see your engineering section as soon as my people are moving. Granted, this way. They moved through the corridor. Behind them, the 4 Terrans carrying equipment were already splitting 2 toward the cargo bay hatch with the portable heating units balanced on their shoulders, 2 more with bundles of thermal wraps tucked under their arms. The medic, Akafor, was pulling on examination gloves as he walked, his long stride eating up the corridor with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done exactly this kind of work before, on exactly this kind of ship, in exactly this kind of emergency. Tavril heard the cargo bay hatch open behind him. He heard the voices his passengers, startled by the sudden appearance of Terrans in gray jumpsuits carrying unfamiliar equipment. He heard a child's voice, high and clear. Are those the rescuers? And a woman's voice, the same broad-shouldered woman from the front row, he was certain. Yes, sit still. He led Perrin through the corridor. She walked the way Terrans walked, quick, efficient, her eyes cataloging everything. The dimmed lights, the frost on the overhead conduits, the sealed hatches, the emergency lighting strips along the deck. She said nothing about any of it, but he could see her storing it, incorporating it into whatever tactical assessment was running continuously behind those dark, alert eyes. They reached engineering. Merritt looked up from the console where he had been monitoring the coolant breach for 3 hours straight. His copper scales were dulled with exhaustion, and his hands were wrapped in insulation tape where he had burned them on a hot manifold. Chief Perrin, Terran Damage Control, Perrin said. Show me the crack. Merritt brought up the schematic. Perrin studied it for 11 seconds. Tavril counted. 40-centimeter weld seam failure on the primary coolant line, currently at 61 centimeters and growing. You can't weld it pressurized. You can't depressurize without killing the port reactor. Port reactor powers cargo bay heating. Correct, Merritt said. But you don't need the port reactor for cargo bay heating anymore, because my people just deployed 6 portable heaters in your cargo bay. Silence. Merritt looked at Tavril. Tavril looked at Perrin. Shut down the port reactor, Perrin said. Depressurize the primary line. I'll have this crack welded in 40 minutes. My kit handles Drevani alloy. We carry multi-spectrum welding rigs as standard because we never know what we'll find on these corridors. While the reactor is down, my ship will extend a power umbilical to supplement your starboard reactor. Commander Wen has already authorized it. Before Perrin had even seen the crack, before she had even boarded. Commander Wen had looked at the schematics Tavril had sent during their first conversation, understood the probable repair procedure, and pre-authorized the power umbilical because she knew it would be needed. Captain, Merritt said, waiting for the order. Tavril hesitated, not because the plan was wrong, it was elegant, simple, and it would work. He hesitated because accepting it meant accepting that a Terran chief warrant officer had solved in 11 seconds a problem his own engineer had been fighting for 3 hours. And she had done it not through brilliance, but through the simple fact that her ship carried equipment his did not, and her commander had made decisions his authorities had not. "Shut down the port reactor," he said. Merritt shut it down. The bridge lights flickered as the starboard reactor took the full load, and then steadied as the Brannigan's power umbilical came online, a clean, stable feed that showed on the engineering console as a green bar labeled External Supply, Terran. While Perrin worked on the crack, Tavril stood in the engineering compartment and watched. She moved with the practiced economy of someone who had welded 100 different alloys on 100 different ships, each movement deliberate, each tool selection made without hesitation. Her welding rig adjusted its frequency automatically when she brought it to the Drevani alloy, calibrating itself to the metal's specific thermal conductivity. She ran the bead in 3 passes, a base pass to fill the seam, a reinforcement pass on each side to strengthen the surrounding metal, and a finishing pass to smooth the surface. Between passes, she spoke to Merritt. Not orders, not instructions, questions. What was the original weld specification? How old was the coolant line? Had the ship experienced any thermal cycling events in the past year that might have stressed the joint? She listened to his answers with the attention of someone who was not just fixing this crack, but trying to understand why it had cracked in the first place, so she could tell him how to prevent it from happening again. Merritt, who had been working alone in this compartment for 3.5 hours, who had burned his hands and given away his jacket and rigged a bypass with salvaged conduit, watched the Terran work with an expression Tavril had never seen on his engineer's face. Not gratitude, something closer to recognition. The look of a professional watching another professional do the same work he did, with better tools in less time, and without any suggestion that the difference in tools implied a difference in skill. Perrin had the crack welded in 36 minutes. 4 minutes under her own estimate. She did not mention this. She simply closed her welding kit, ran a pressure test, watched the numbers stabilize, rechecked the adjacent weld joints for sympathetic stress fractures, finding none, and said, "Your primary line is holding. I'd recommend a full replacement at your next port, but this weld will get you to Orth Colony and back twice before it needs attention." "How can you know that?" Merritt asked. It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question from an engineer who wanted to understand the Terran's confidence in her own work. "Because I know this alloy. We've welded it on 4 other Drevani ships this year on this corridor. Your Commerce Authority uses a standard specification for coolant lines, the same alloy, the same gauge, the same weld points. Once you've done it 4 times, you know exactly how the metal behaves under stress and how long a field weld will hold. 4 other Drevani ships, this year, on this corridor. Perrin had repaired Drevani coolant systems 4 times before, because 4 other Drevani merchant captains had sent distress calls through Junction 77R and had their calls forwarded to the Terran network, and the Brannigan had responded to those calls, and Perrin had welded those cracks. Tavril nodded. "Thank you, Chief Perrin." "Just doing the job, Captain." From the cargo bay, Tavril's communicator crackled. It was Dren, still on the bridge. "Captain, cargo bay temperature is rising, currently at 6 degrees and climbing. The Terran heating units are operational. Medical report from their medic. Akafer, the 2 elderly passengers with hypothermic stress are responding to treatment. No other medical emergencies." 6 degrees and climbing. The bay had been at -4 20 minutes ago. The Terran's heating units had reversed the thermal decline in less time than it had taken Tavril to walk from the bridge to the airlock and back. "Captain," Gellen's voice came through next. "The Commerce Authority vessel Orith's Hand has updated its ETA. They are now 5 hours out." 5 hours. The Terrans had been aboard for 40 minutes. The crack was welded. The passengers were warm. The reactor was restarting, and the Commerce Authority was still 5 hours away. Tavro climbed back to the bridge. Through the main viewport, he could see the Brannigan holding station alongside a small, battered, vaguely ungainly ship, with its power umbilical extended to the sullen tide's hull like an arm reaching out to steady a stumbling neighbor. "Gellin, open a channel to the Brannigan." "Channel open, Captain." "Commander Wen, this is Captain Oscari. Your team has completed repairs to the primary coolant line. The port reactor is restarting. Cargo bay temperature is rising. My passengers are stable. I want to note for the record that your assistance was rendered efficiently and professionally." "Glad to hear it, Captain. We'll maintain station alongside until your Commerce Authority vessel arrives, if that's acceptable. Just in case." Just in case. The crack was welded, the passengers were warm, the reactor was restarting, and the Terrans were offering to stay for another 5 hours just in case. Because the job, in their assessment, was not finished until someone from Tavro's own government arrived to relieve them. They were not leaving until the proper authority was on scene, even though the proper authority was the one that had been 7 hours away while the Terrans were 3. "That is acceptable, Commander. Thank you." "One more thing, Captain. The Marsh Hen is 2 hours out now. Captain Vasquez wants you to know that he's carrying surplus ration packs Terran standard, but compatible with Drevani dietary requirements. We checked. He'd like to distribute them to your passengers if you're willing. 412 people have been sitting in a freezing cargo bay for 3 hours. They might be hungry." "Ration packs. The Terrans wanted to feed his passengers." "Commander Wen, I did not request food for my passengers." "No, sir, Captain Vasquez is offering." "Because he has children." A pause, the briefest human pause, the kind that meant he had surprised her, and she was recalibrating. "Because your passengers have been through a rough few hours, Captain, and we have the supplies." Tavro sat down in his command chair. The bridge was still cold, but less so. The environmental system was recovering as the port reactor came back online, and the first trace of warmth was beginning to creep back into the air. "Tell Captain Vasquez his offer is accepted, with gratitude." "Copy that." Brannigan out. He sat in the chair for a long time. Around him, the sullen tide was coming back to life, the lights brightening, the environmental hum deepening, the groans and shudders of the port nacelle quieting as the repaired coolant line did its work. From the cargo bay, he could hear something he had not heard in 3 hours, the sound of children, not crying, talking. The high, clear voices of Drevani children who had been frightened and cold and who were now warm enough to talk again. "Captain," Gellin said quietly. "What is it?" "I've reviewed the full routing tree for our distress call. The Junction 77 RC node log shows that the auto-forward to the Terran network has been active for 7 years. Every emergency signal that has passed through Junction 77R in the last 7 years has been forwarded to the Terran Mutual Aid Network. The Commerce Authority's own records show that this node was installed as part of the Treaty of Shared Lanes ratification and was never deactivated, despite the Commerce Authority's formal objection to Article 119. They objected to the article and then did not remove the node that enforced it. That appears to be the case, Captain. So for 7 years, every Drevani merchant captain who has transmitted a distress call through this corridor has had that call forwarded to the Terrans without their knowledge. Yes, Captain. And in those 7 years, how many times have the Terrans responded? Gellin checked. The answer took a moment. 14 times, Captain. The Brannigan alone has responded to 6 distress calls from non-Terran commercial vessels on this corridor. The Marsh Hen has responded to 3. Other Terran assets account for the remaining 5. 14 times. In 7 years. 14 Drevani merchant captains or captains of other species transiting the shared corridor had sent distress calls to their own authorities and had those calls quietly, automatically forwarded to the Terran network. And 14 times the Terrans had responded, not because they were asked, because the node was active and they were monitoring and their ships were closer. Were any of those 14 captains aware that their signals had been forwarded to the Terrans? The logs do not indicate whether they were informed, but the routing anomaly notation is standard in the transmission confirmation. Any captain who read the full confirmation would have seen it. Any captain who read the full confirmation, Tavril repeated. He had read it. He had read it 3 times. Most captains, he suspected, read the first line signal received, forwarded to primary destination and stopped. The routing tree was a technical detail. The C-node notation was buried on the 3rd line. The information that your distress call had been sent to an entirely different civilization was there, in plain text, in the standard confirmation that every captain received, and almost none of them read completely. The port reactor came fully online. The sullen tide's power generation returned to nominal. The engineering console showed all systems green except the cargo bay heating, which was running on a hybrid of ship power, and the Terran portable units, a configuration that Merritt reported, was actually more efficient than the ship's original system, because the Terran heaters were newer and better insulated than the sullen tide's 20-year-old cargo bay vents. In the cargo bay, Chief Perrin's medic, a tall Terran named Akafer with large, gentle hands that looked strange against Drevani scales, was finishing his rounds. The 2 elderly passengers were stable. The children were wrapped in a combination of Drevani thermal blankets and Terran emergency wraps, creating an odd patchwork of Commerce Authority green and Terran Navy gray across the rows of fold-down seats. 2 hours later, the Marsh Hen arrived. It was less visually impressive than the Brannigan, a squat, wide-bodied supply tender that looked like a cargo container given engines and a sense of purpose. Its hull paint had faded to a mottled pewter along the ventral plates, and the engine nacelles bore the distinctive discoloration of a ship that had been running at emergency speed. Captain Vasquez had pushed his ship hard to get here, and the ship's hull recorded the fact. Captain Vasquez was a compact Terran male with a thick mustache and the expression of a man who took the transit of ration packs very seriously. He came aboard the sullen tide personally and shook Tavril's hand at the airlock with a grip that was firm and brief. "Captain Oscari, I've got supplies for your passengers." He brought 412 ration packs, 1 per passenger. Tavril watched that number register and said nothing, because the Marsh Hen's standard complement was 300. Vasquez had loaded an additional 112 before departure. He had read the passenger count and had loaded exactly the right number, not a round estimate, but 412, 1 for each name on the manifest. Each pack contained a meal, a warming drink, a nutrient supplement, and a small packet of what the label described as chocolate. Tavril had never heard of chocolate. He watched his passengers open the packets and watched their expressions change, from the exhaustion of people who had been cold and frightened to the bewildered gratitude of people being fed by strangers who owed them nothing. The children discovered the chocolate first. A low murmur spread through the cargo by the collective sound of 412 people encountering an unexpected kindness in the middle of an emergency they had not yet fully recovered from. The woman from the front row, the one who had given away her blanket, the one who had asked, "Will they have heat?" ate her ration pack slowly, the way someone eats when they have been too cold to feel hungry and are only now remembering that hunger exists. She held the warming drink in both hands and looked at the Terran label and did not try to read it. Vasquez also brought the 8 emergency life support pods, which he offloaded into the sullen tide's forward cargo hold as a precaution. "In case your patch doesn't hold," he told Merritt, without condescension. Just a practical statement from a practical man who understood that a field weld was not a dock repair, and that having a backup was competence. Merritt looked at the pods, each one capable of sustaining 50 people for 72 hours, and nodded slowly. "Thank you," Merritt said. "Sure thing," Vasquez said. Then, as an afterthought that was clearly not an afterthought, "Your hands, you burned them on the manifold." Merritt looked at his wrapped hands. "It's minor. Akaffer, the medic on the Brannigan, he's got a burn kit. Let him look at them before we leave." "I'll be fine." "I'm sure you will, but let him look anyway. He gets bored if he doesn't have enough patience." It was a joke in the way that Terrans made jokes flat, understated, delivered with a face that did not change. Merritt, who did not know Terrans, looked confused. Tavril, who was beginning to know them, understood that the Terran captain was offering medical care without making it sound like charity, because he had intuited that a Drevani engineer would refuse charity but might accept a favor done for a bored medic. 5 hours after the Brannigan's arrival, the Commerce Authority vessel Orith's Hand finally dropped out of transit at Junction 77R. It was a large, well-maintained cruiser with the Commerce Authority's seal on its bow and a crew complement of 300. Its captain, a senior Drevani officer named Khalis Yenfar, hailed the sullen tide. "Captain Asghari, Commerce Authority vessel Orith's Hand responding to your distress call. We are prepared to render full assistance." Tavril looked at the Brannigan, still holding station alongside. He looked at the Marsh Hen, still connected to his forward hold. He looked at the engineering console, all systems green, the primary coolant line welded and holding, the port reactor at full output. "Thank you, Captain Yenfar. The situation has been resolved. A Terran Corvette and supply tender have been on station for the past 5 hours. Repairs are complete. Passengers are stable, all systems nominal." The silence from the Orith's Hand lasted 4 seconds. "Terran vessels, I see. We were not informed that Terran assets were responding." "They were not requested, Captain. The Junction 77R C-Node auto-forwarded my distress call to the Terran Mutual Aid Network under Article 119 of the Treaty of Shared Lanes. The Terrans responded before I was aware the forwarding had occurred." Another silence, longer. "I will note that in my report." "I will note it in mine as well." Tavril could hear the careful neutrality in Yenfar's voice, the professional mask of a Commerce Authority captain who had arrived to find a situation already handled by a species his government had formally objected to involving. Yenfar was not angry. He was embarrassed. His cruiser had 300 crew, full repair facilities, medical bays, and enough berthing for every passenger on the sullen tide. He had everything Tavril had needed, and he had arrived 5 hours after it had ceased to matter. Commander Wen came on the channel. Her voice carried no trace of triumph. It was the same measured calm she had maintained from the first moment she answered Tavril's hail. "Commerce Authority vessel Orith's Hand, this is TCV Brannigan. Happy to brief you on the repairs we've completed and the current status of the sullen tide and her passengers. We'll transfer station-keeping responsibility to you at your convenience." "Acknowledged, Brannigan. Stand by for transfer." It took 40 minutes to complete the handover. Perrin's damage control team retrieved their heating units from the cargo bay. Though they left the thermal wraps with the passengers, "Keep them," Perrin told Merritt. "We'll resupply at our next port." Vasquez left the 8 life support pods aboard the sullen tide. "Easier than hauling them back," he said, though Tavril suspected the real reason was that the tender captain wanted them left aboard in case the sullen tide needed them on the remaining transit to Orith Colony. Akaffer, the medic, filed a complete medical report and transmitted it to both the Brannigan and the sullen tide, documenting every patient he had treated, every vital sign he had recorded, every recommendation for follow-up care at Orith Colony's medical facilities. He had also, Tavril noticed, treated Merritt's burned hands properly, with a Terran burn kit that left Marit's copper scales gleaming under a thin layer of regenerative gel, his hands wrapped in clean medical tape instead of the insulation tape he had used as a field dressing. The Terran medic had not asked Marit for permission. He had simply appeared in engineering, said, "Let me see those hands," and treated them while Marit was too startled to object. The Brannigan uncoupled. The Marsh Hen uncoupled. The two Terran vessels pulled away from the sullen tide, the small Corvette and the squat tender, side by side, both battered and unremarkable, both already turning back to their original headings as though the last 5 hours had been a minor detour in a routine patrol. Tavril watched them go. He stood at the main viewport of the bridge, his copper-scaled hands clasped behind his back, and watched the two blue triangles on the navigation display recede into the traffic of Corridor 9 fall. "Captain," Gellin said. "What is it, Gellin?" "Commander Wen is transmitting a final message." "Read it." It says, "Captain Ascari, safe travels to Orith Colony. If Junction 77R gives you any trouble on the way, we'll still be on the corridor, close enough to hear you. Regards, Wen." Close enough to hear you. Tavril stood at the viewport for a long time. The Orith's hand was taking position alongside now the proper authority, the vessel he had called for, the Commerce Authority cruiser that would escort him to port and file the official incident report. Everything was back in order. Everything was by the book. Except that the book, he was beginning to understand, had a chapter in it he had never read. A chapter installed 7 years ago at Junction 77R, written in the language of a treaty subclause that the Commerce Authority had formally objected to and then quietly left active. A chapter that said, when you send your call into the dark, it does not always go only where you aim it. Sometimes it goes further. Sometimes it reaches people who were not supposed to hear it. And sometimes those people, the wrong people, the uninvited people, the ones whose ships are battered and whose ration packs come with chocolate, are the ones who answer first. He unclenched his hands. "Gellin." "Captain." Add a note to the ship's log, personal addendum from the captain. "Ready, Captain." Log the following. Junction Node 77R, C Node, is active and functioning as designed under Article 119 of the Treaty of Shared Lanes. The captain of the Sullen Tide does not recommend its deactivation. Gellin typed it. Logged, Captain. Tavril Ascari, Merchant Captain, 30 years on the corridors, a man who had built his career on procedure and protocol and the belief that the proper systems would provide, sat down in his command chair and watched the Orith's hand take station alongside. In the cargo bay below, 412 passengers were warm and fed, 91 children among them, wrapped in a patchwork of Drevani green and Terran gray. The distress call had gone where he aimed it, and it had gone where he did not. And the ones who had not been asked were the ones who had come first, who had welded the crack and fed the children and left chocolate in the ration packs and stayed 5 hours longer than they needed to, just in case. He looked at the routing confirmation on his console one more time. The C-Node notation, the Terran network acknowledgement, 3 words, acknowledged, monitoring. They had been monitoring. They had always been monitoring. And they had come anyway without being asked, because a junction node 7 years old had done what junction nodes do, forwarded the signal, as designed, to anyone close enough to hear. Tavril Ascari closed the routing log and began his captain's report. The first line read, "At 14:02 on this date, the Sullen Tide transmitted a Class 2 distress call. It was received by the intended recipients. It was also received by others. The others arrived first." He wrote the rest of the report in the same steady hand he had used for 30 years of logs, and when he reached the section on external assistance rendered, he spelled every Terran name correctly.